what it takes to hire Navy SEALs is different than what it takes to hire someone in sales or in marketing or whatever. But the basic elemental concepts are the same. In other words, every team or every organization is going to have its own unique set of attributes that are important to being on that team. That list of attributes that make up a great SEAL team is going to look different than the list of attributes that make up a great sales team or marketing team.
Here's a pre-show scenario for you. Imagine you had to visit 16 houses just to cook your dinner. One place has the pots and pans, one has the stove, another has the food. You get the idea. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the reality is most global businesses operate the same way, using 16 different tools to hire, pay, manage, and develop their workforce. But now there's one platform that does it all. Deal. That's DEEL. Deal is your forever people platform built for global payroll and HR. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deal works for your entire team. So are you ready to transform your global payroll and HR processes? If you are, click the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deal today. That's DEEL. Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D Podcast. My name is Nick Day. I'm the CEO at JJ Recruitment Group. We're specialist HR recruiters. And here is where we explore the intersection of human resources and learning and development. And today we're joined by Rich Diviney, a retired Navy SEAL commander and founder of the Attributes Inc. You may wonder, why have I brought this individual to the show? One, I'm hugely excited because anyone who's worked for the Navy SEALs or been involved in that will know all about the idea of leadership. And Rich has a 20-year military career, which has included 13 overseas deployments and the leadership of elite SEAL selection processes. Now he works in a consulting firm that combines that SEAL expertise with neuroscience and psychology to unlock human potential in business. And that's where it relates to you, our listeners, our HR professionals. We know that leadership is a hot topic right now. And we're going to really hope today to unlock some of Rich's expertise to really bring some of his theories and methodologies to the fore. If you're not familiar with Rich, he is also the author of the best-selling book, The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. He's worked with leading clients including Google, Lexus, Deloitte, Bank of America, and even the San Francisco 49ers. He's also collaborated closely with leadership experts such as Simon Sinek. And today I'm hoping to unlock some of those unique insights. And we're going to discover how to build high-performing teams. And most importantly, in the context of Rich being on the show, how we can apply SEAL experience to the world of HR and L&D. So, Rich, welcome to the HR L&D Podcast. Pleasure to have you on the show. How are you feeling?
I feel great, Nick. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Super stoked. I'm going to start my first question, which I'm interested. This is going to be different, I guess, from probably the majority of responses I get to this question. It's a foundational question. What do the words human resources mean to you?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I think it is they mean to me a reminder, a very serious reminder that human beings are the primary resource in any team or organization. You don't lead machines, you don't lead equipment, right? You lead human beings, and so and I think any leader understands that their team is made up of a dynamic combination of different types of human that all contribute to the common good and common goal. And if we think of them as resources, we actually have a better, more healthy, more productive spin versus some people who are just in charge and they think of their people as just widgets or knobs or levers to be pulled, and if something's broken, they'll just replace them. So I think it's a very healthy way to think about humans on a team.
Absolutely, great place to start the show. Now, obviously, I started an introduction. Now, your business is called The Attributes. Your book is also about the 25 attributes. What I want to do is just sort of set the tone, really, because not everyone will necessarily understand the difference between attributes and skills. So why in particular are you focusing on that word, attributes, and why are attributes so crucial for team performance?
Yeah, just a quick bit on how I kind of thought of this when I was in the SEAL teams and running some very elite SEAL selection and assessments. I was asked by my leadership to start see if I could better articulate why guys were not making it through. And so very, very HR centric in terms of the piece of, hey, we're trying to hire people for our team, and some people are making it and some people are not. Why is that? And previous to that, to me taking over, the reasons were things like, well, the guy couldn't shoot very well, or the guy couldn't skydive very well, and you can't tell Navy SEALs of that caliber they can't shoot very well, right? It's like, I mean, these guys have probably got more rounds than most people in the military. So it was disingenuous. And so what I recognized as I really dug in was that SEAL training, Navy SEAL training, or even the kind of the specialized elite training I was running, is not about skill. It's not about we don't pick people based on their ability to shoot or swim or skydive or anything like that. We actually put them through experiences and through challenges that tease out these other things, these qualities, these attributes. And so a real quick example of this would be I was talking to an older SEAL, and he told me a story of a kid showing up to Navy SEAL training one day. And he said, this kid walks into the instructor's offices and says, I want to be a Navy SEAL. And the instructor said, okay, well, you have to do a swim test. And the kid said, okay. And so the kid gets out there, and it's an easy swim test. It's 50 meters. So 25 meters to one end, 25 meters to the other end. Anyway, this kid gets all ready to go, jumps into the pool, and sinks right to the bottom of the pool. And at the bottom of the pool, he begins walking to one side of the pool, and then he touches that side, and he walks at the bottom of the pool to the other side. He comes up, he's gasping for air, right, nearly drowning, and the instructor looks at him and says, "What the heck are you doing?" And the kid, who's still trying to catch his breath, looks at the instructor and says, "I'm sorry, instructor, I don't know how to swim." And at that point, the instructor looks at the kid and pauses, and he says, "That's okay, we can teach you how to swim." And there's a reason for that. And the reason is because that instructor knew that if that kid had the qualities, the attributes to show up to Navy SEAL training without knowing how to swim, he had everything inside of him that we needed for him to be a Navy SEAL. Teaching him the skill of swimming was going to be easy. And so I began to kind of bifurcate these two terms. And just to give the audience a quick definition, skills are not inherent to our nature. In other words, we're not born with the ability to swim or ride a bike or throw a ball. We're taught to do those things. Okay. Skills direct our behavior in known and specific environments. Here's how and when to throw a ball or ride a bike or drive a car. Because skills are very visible, they're very easy to assess, measure, and test. You can see how well anybody does any one of those things. And you can put them on, you can put scores around skills, you can put statistics around skills. And this is why we get seduced by skills, because you can put them on resumes as well. The problem with skills is they don't tell us how we're going to show up in stress, challenge, and uncertainty. This is when we lean on our attributes. It's difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill to an unknown environment. So we lean on our attributes. Attributes, on the other hand, are inherent to our nature. In other words, all of us are born with certain levels of patience, situational awareness, adaptability. You can certainly develop those things over time and experience, yes, but you can see levels of this stuff in very small children. Anybody who's listening who has children or has experienced children will agree with me when I say there are 1.5-year-olds who are patient and there are 1.5-year-olds who are impatient. Okay, so there's a nature-nurture element to attributes. Attributes don't direct our behavior. They inform our behavior. They tell us how we're going to show up to an environment. So my son's levels of resilience and perseverance informed the way he was learning the skill of riding a bike, and he was falling off a dozen times doing so. And then finally, because they're difficult to see, they're very difficult to assess, measure, and test. How do you measure someone's levels of adaptability or patience, right? But they show up the most visibly and viscerally during times of stress, challenge, and uncertainty. And if we're missing attributes, if we're not considering attributes in the performance picture, we are at risk of missing the most important part of what makes up the highest performing teams, because the highest performing teams and individuals perform not only when things are going great, but also when things are not going great. And it's when things are not going great that we really heavily lean on these attributes. And so that was the impetus of the work. And that's kind of the distinction.
No, you summarized that perfectly. I wondered if that story, maybe I've read the David Goggins, both of David Goggins' books. I don't know if that's the individual you're referring to, but there's a famous.
It was not David, but
yeah, it's a similar story. But and I get it. I mean, I work in recruitment, and we always say that skills can be taught. It's the attitude that you need, and I guess attitude forms part of that attribute. If you've got the attitude to do it, but of course it goes broader than just the word attitude, because you mentioned there, David, that individual is not just the attitude to get in the water; it's the bravery, the courage. Yeah. You can have a good attitude but not be courageous. So I can understand why attributes play together. So bring this into an HR context then, and you mentioned team selection there and how it's not just skill focused. How can we apply the SEAL team selection process that you're familiar with and you've been utilizing into a corporate hiring team in a corporate setting?
Well, the quick answer is you don't. In other words, you don't. What it takes to hire Navy SEALs is different than what it takes to hire someone in sales or in marketing or whatever. But the basic elemental concepts are the same. In other words, every team or every organization is going to have its own unique set of attributes that are important to being on that team. That list of attributes that make up a great SEAL team is going to look different than the list of attributes that make up a great sales team or marketing team, right? So the idea is, if you know these attributes, you also can understand that every human being comes to the table with a different set of attributes. And by set, I mean this, and just for your audience's knowledge, we all have all of the attributes. And I wrote about 25 in the book. We're now with organizations and teams, we're working with 41 different attributes, but we all have all 41. The difference in each one of us are the levels to which we have each. So if we take adaptability, for example, I would be, if 7 is high and 1 is low, I'm about a level 6 on adaptability, which means when the environment changes around me outside of my control, it's fairly easy for me to go with the flow. Someone else might be a level 3 on adaptability, which means the same thing happens to them. It's difficult for them to go with the flow. They are still adaptable. There's just friction there. There's challenge. And so if we were to kind of line up these attributes on a wall like dimmer switches, all of us would have different dimmer switch settings, and that starts to speak to our own individual performance. And what we have to understand as team members, and as certainly as people who are hiring individuals, that everybody's going to come with different sets of attributes. And what we have to understand is, what are the attributes we're looking for specific roles or for an organization, and let's look at and let's hire for that, because that person is going to be the better fit overall and over long term. How often do we hear of businesses and organizations saying that they hire people, and then within 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, or a year, they're gone. They don't work out. That's a very expensive venture. And it's often because they haven't looked more deeply into the attributes this person is bringing to the team, to the table, to the organization, because it's really about that connection, right? That connection. And again, I don't badmouth skills. Skills are important. And there are certainly prerequisites for most jobs, in terms of, you're not going to hire an accountant who has no accounting training, right? So
Sure.
There are skills that are required. However, it doesn't mean that the best accountant is the best fit. You may find someone who's pretty good at accounting, but they're a perfect fit. They have all the attributes, which means once they get into your environment, they will just become rock stars. And that's what we have to consider.
So can you give an example? I guess it's more sort of circumstantial based questions, I guess, but in an interview scenario, in that you're assessing for whatever, you can pick any attribute you like from that 41. What's an example kind of question an HR professional might want to consider when they're trying to interview them from the staff, taking it away from that skills element?
Yes. Yeah. So the key for attributes is, and to kind of assess them, is to insert a little bit of stress, challenge, and uncertainty into the equation. So you can do this two ways. You can do this experientially, or you can do this sometimes with the way you ask questions. So let me answer this in two ways. Let's talk about experientially first, because a lot of times there's things that you have candidates do. So let's imagine, Nick, you and I wanted to hire someone who's great at sales. Okay. And we tell this person on Friday, we say, hey, come in Monday morning and you're going to sell us this pencil, right? We wait the weekend, we come in Monday morning, this person shows up and proceeds just to wow us on their pencil presentation. We're looking at each other like, man, that's the best thing I've ever seen. The problem is we would not have learned very much. All we would have learned is that person's really good at going home, preparing a presentation and giving a presentation, okay? And we know sales takes a lot more than that. And so what we do instead is we say on Friday, hey, come in Monday, you're going to sell us this pencil. Monday morning comes along and we say, hey, you know what? The plan's changed. You're no longer going to sell us this pencil. You're going to sell us this phone. Okay. And by the way, there's no audio visual. So just go with it. All right. Now, at this point, what you and I have to do is make a deliberate decision to divorce ourselves from skills assessment, because what we're about to see is going to be ugly. However, we're not looking at skills anymore. We're looking at how this person reacts and behaves. Okay. Do they make light of it? Do they figure it out? Do they just go on the fly? Or do they complain? Do they make excuses? Do they go down a spiral? Now we're looking at attributes. Okay. So we can start to tease out attributes if we implement some stress, challenge, and uncertainty. The key is we have to know which attributes we're looking for. That's number one. And then we have to, again, implement some stress, challenge, and uncertainty. You can do this with the way we ask questions as well. Oftentimes when we ask questions in an interview, they are questions that have already been predicted and sometimes even prepared for by the candidate. And we're not getting a lot from that. Okay. So we want to insert a little bit more uncertainty into the question. So let me give you an example. I was doing some work with a company out here in the States, and they were in Colorado, construction company. Great guys. They were what I call Uber patriots. Okay, there were flags everywhere, pro military. They were really fun guys, fun to work. I mean, but American flags everywhere.
Yeah.
And one of the key attributes that they decided they were looking for in their candidates was open-mindedness. And the CEO said, well, Rich, how do I ask a question to test or tease out someone's open-mindedness. And I said, well, let me give you an example. He said, okay. I said, give me 3 reasons right now to burn the American flag. And you can see he almost had an aneurysm when I asked him that question, right? But what I was trying to do with that question was pull him out of his fishbowl to see if he could look at it from a different perspective, right? And so this is an example of how you can take a question, you can mold it and shape it and pull someone out of what they're expecting and have them answer in a different way. But the only way you can do that is to know which attributes you're looking for at the outset. Because if you don't know which ones you're looking for, it's just kind of frenetic energy.
Yeah, sure. No, well, great examples for sure. And it encourages people to think laterally as well, which I love. And it's a muscle we don't test enough, I think, certainly in the interview process. So you've talked about the attributes. There's 25, of course, in your book, 25 hidden drivers of optimal performance. You've mentioned that since then you developed that to 41.
Yeah.
From your knowledge of HR and human capital and the commercial work that you've done with corporates, what do you think would be some of the attributes then that we could highlight that might be particularly relevant for the world of HR?
Yeah, Nick, I wish I could answer that in specificity, but the idea, and I'll give you, I won't dodge the question. I'll give you some, okay? But what we have to understand is that every HR professional is in a very unique environment. So the reason why the list of 41 is a great list is because it's never all 41 that you're looking for. You need to figure out which of those 41 are important for you, for your organization, for the role you're hiring. But without dodging the question, let's just talk about a few that are pretty darn important, okay? Accountability is an important attribute, especially in the leadership roles. Decisiveness is an important attribute, especially in leadership roles. You could say in terms of adaptability, depending on the organization, startups, if it's a startup or a new organization that's moving quite quickly, you're going to want to look for people who are okay and comfortable with adaptability, because if they're not, whereas a company that's been around for 10, 20, 30 years and may not be as rapidly changing, you might not need a lot of adaptability. So it's incumbent on HR professionals to look at these attributes and understand, okay, what are the bunch that I might be looking for, and those will change depending on leadership roles, depending on engineer roles. You know, your engineers, for example, when we talk about, say, the mental acuity attributes, which just for everybody's knowledge are situation awareness, my ability to kind of see and understand an environment; compartmentalization, my ability to focus in on something and block out everything else; task switching, my ability to jump from different tasks and different focus points; learnability, how quickly and efficiently can I learn; and then finally discernment, my ability to understand and notice very fine, small details. Your engineers, you're going to want higher on compartmentalization and higher on discernment, right? Because they're the ones who are in there, locked in, and you don't want them to miss details, and they're going to be kind of focused in. But that might not be the right profile for a CEO, because a CEO needs to look up and out, right? And so too much compartmentalization with a CEO is going to create a micromanager who can't see the big picture very easily, right? So there's a very unique and individual and nuanced approach that each HR professionals need to kind of embark upon to understand what are the particular attributes that I'm looking for and how do they fit this role. The good news is all of this is plain language, right? There's no, and one of the reasons why I think we're having success not only in the States but also globally is because while most personality tests, and by the way, I like almost all of them, I love personality tests, right? But most of them, when you take them, they give you a couple colors, you know, maybe I'm red, blue, maybe some letters, I'm INTJ, or some numbers, I'm 5'3" or whatever. The problem with that is that I can't talk to anybody who doesn't understand what that means about what I am, right? So, and by the way, if I haven't looked at it in a couple of weeks, I probably will forget what that means anyway.
Sure, that's definitely
this is all regular language. Everybody can talk about adaptability. Everybody can talk about resilience. Everybody can talk about patience. So this is language that even if an HR professional is very heavily indoctrinated into, the people they're dealing with don't necessarily need to be because you can still have a conversation about it, and that's the beauty of it.
So, we talked about the distinction and the differences between skills and attributes. Skills, of course, can be developed, they can be taught, they can be improved upon. I'm making an assumption that the same is true for attributes. I'm trying to think now of giving you a question that's going to make you think on your feet and put you in that uncomfortable zone. It's going to be difficult because you're an expert in this field. So let me ask you this. When you made the transition from being an elite member of the SEAL team into the corporate world to deliver the work that you do, what was the attribute in yourself that you realized in that moment was most lacking, and what did you need to do to help unlock that attribute or to improve upon it? And are there ways to improve all attributes, or are some harder than others? But I'm particularly interested to know what, because it can be difficult going from military into the corporate world. And I know
Yeah.
that sometimes can be a shock. So I imagine when you did that, you're like, I'm ready and I'm prepared. And actually, I'm lacking in this area. And I wonder what that was for you. Hello, HR and people leaders. Are you exhausted of the war for talent cliche? The problem is when we hear a cliche, it usually exists for a reason. However, we think it's time for a fresh approach to the talent crisis. That's because at JGA Recruitment, we understand the real challenges you face in sourcing phenomenal HR and people candidates. And guess what? We think we have the solution. Our team is on a mission to revolutionize your hiring process. That's because we're not just recruiters, we're strategic partners dedicated to finding HR and people professionals who align perfectly with your company's vision and goals. So let's break the cycle of frustration together. Partner your talent acquisition strategies with JGA Recruitment and experience the difference in service, excellence, and results. No longer do you need to suffer the costs associated with a poor hire, because with over 100 five-star Google reviews and already trusted by many of the world's leading brands, why don't you take action today? Contact us at jjrecruitment.com to discover how we can help transform your HR and people teams. And here's a bonus. When you visit us, you can sign up for our weekly HR newsletter that's packed with invaluable industry insights and more. Let's revolutionize your HR talent acquisition strategies together and make the war for talent a cry from the past. Visit jjrecruitment.com to find out more.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would say there's certainly a couple. And let me just say, just to before I answer the question, you can definitely you can train skills, you can develop attributes. So in other words,
Nice.
the way that you can distinguish, by the way, whether or not you're dealing with a skill or an attribute is to ask yourself a very simple question: can I teach it or can it be taught? If the answer is yes, it's probably a skill. If the answer is no, it's probably an attribute. So Nick, you could say, hey, Rich, I want to learn how to shoot a pistol and hit a bullseye. I could take you to the range and teach you how to do that within a couple hours. Right? That's a skill. Or you could say, Rich, I want to learn how to be more patient. I can't teach you how to be more patient. So to develop an attribute takes three criteria. First, it takes.
And that's why you say all of us have the same 41, right? That's because we already have it.
We all have 41. We're just at different levels. So so to develop one takes number one, you need to know you're low on it. Okay. Again, no one has none. No one has zero. You're just low on it. So you need to know you're low on it. Second of all, you have to have a reason, motivation, desire to develop it. What do I mean by that? What I mean by it is just because you're low on an attribute doesn't mean you need to develop it. In fact, a lot of times your being low on specific attributes has actually often contributed to your success in what you're doing. Okay. So you need to make a careful analysis as to whether or not developing this particular attribute will be, in fact, beneficial to whatever niche you're in. I always kind of say the stand-up comic who has too much empathy is going to be a lousy stand-up comic. Okay. A stand-up comic does not need to develop their empathy. All right. But so you're low on it, you need to dial it up or develop it. The third one's the most important. You have to go find environments inside of which tease and develop and pull out that attribute. So if you want to develop your patience, you go find environments that test and tease and develop your patience, right? Whatever that looks like for you. It could be I'm going to drive in traffic deliberately, or I'm going to pick the longest line in the grocery store to stand in. I always say have kids. Having kids will develop patience, right? But whatever that is, okay. So just everybody should know that you can develop attributes. You can dial them up in certain cases. If you're low on patience, right, there are certain cases where you need to make a conscious effort to dial up your patience. The idea is if your attribute list, and in our assessment, we kind of give you your top all the way to your bottom. All that means is your top attributes are things you don't have to think about, right? Your bottom ones, you don't have to think about not doing those. Okay. If I'm impatient, if patience is my low one, I'm going to need to think about it. I'm going to need to put in conscious thought to dial up my patience, right? So to get back to your question, I would say, I've always been a pretty open-minded person and curious person. I felt when I got out of the Navy, I had to dial up my open-mindedness and curiosity, right? And it wasn't that they were too low, but I needed to dial up because I was in a whole new environment that was not military, right? And military is very structured. It's very certain in terms of the things that happen, procedures, things like that. There's a lot you don't have to think about in the military environment. So for me, coming out of the military environment, I needed to dial up my open-mindedness and my curiosity and ask myself, okay, what don't I know, and what do I need to understand and learn and be empathetic of? Empathy was another one I needed to dial up, and I've been dialing up. Okay, how do I do that to actually start to get into the heads and understand what others need, and how can I translate what I've done into that medium or mode?
You made an interesting point with the stand-up comedy, which I totally get on dialing down the empathy when you're trying to, turning on to kind of stand-up comedy you are as well, of course. Are there any that are actually diametrically opposed? That it's kind of you can't be optimal in both because it just contradicts. So because
Well,
we're
yeah.
talking about the world of HR, it's all about performance and optimization in this profession, this industry. But is it possible to do it for all attributes?
Yeah, so I would say not diametrically opposed, because the attributes provide a nice gray area that you can kind of play in, and every human being's different. However, we see a lot of trends and tendencies. So, for example, oftentimes if we see high decisiveness, you'll often see low patience. Okay, because high patience sometimes, not always, but high patience sometimes affects one's ability to make decisions quickly and efficiently. And again, decisiveness as an attribute is not the skill of making a decision. You can teach people how to make better decisions. Decisiveness adds that speed and efficiency factor. Another couple that generally are opposed are persistence and tenacity. People think of these words as synonymous. They're in fact not. Persistence is this firm obstinance that I'm going to stick to a course of action and see it through. Okay, this is what I call the stonecutter approach. The stonecutter pounds that rock in the same place 100 times and sees nothing. And then, because he knows on the 101st tap the rock's going to break. That's persistence. Tenacity is I'm going to try something, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to shift approaches. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to shift approaches. That's the car mechanic, right? I'm going to check the belts. If it's not the belts, I'll check the carburetor. If it's not the carburetor, I'll check the tires or whatever, right? You don't necessarily want a persistent mechanic, okay? Because that person will check the belts and then check the belts and then check the belts and keep on checking the belts and just run your bill up, right? You don't necessarily want a tenacious stonecutter. That tenacious stonecutter will tap one place, tap another. They'll never get the stone cut, right? So often we see these a little bit more opposed, because people who are typically higher in tenacity are lower in persistence, and people who are a little bit higher in persistence are lower in tenacity. So there are a few in that 41 that we see trends of them being separated, but I caveat that with saying everybody's different, okay? And we have seen, I've seen at least one or two cases where I've seen both persistence and tenacity kind of in the low end, right? So it just starts to help that person understand their behavior a little bit better.
One question I wanted to ask, and now you are going to be faced and make an assumption that these are uncertain environments, but your training may dictate that actually, Nick, I was always certain in those environments. But in the experience you've had as a Navy SEAL, as a Navy SEAL in particular, would have meant that my assumption is you've been in a lot of uncertain environments, right? But I want to understand, how does uncertainty affect team performance? Because we bring this into an HR context. HR leaders are constantly thrown into uncertain environments. They're constantly dealing with challenges, transformation, loads of resistance. But I know that if we get the attributes right, teams can still thrive even in those circumstances, as Navy SEALs clearly demonstrate. So I wonder if you could just give us some of your experience in relation to how we can thrive in such circumstances.
Yeah, it's such a great question, and very apropos, Nick, because I'm just getting ready to get my second book out, which will be out here in about February, and it's called Masters of Uncertainty, and it's all about how we develop as individuals and teams to be able to thrive in uncertainty. And so the idea is uncertainty. When we're in uncertain environments, our first job is not to necessarily act. So the mistake a lot of times we make is we think our first job in uncertainty is to act. It's not. It's actually to understand. And that understanding is, in fact, buttressed by whatever attributes we're bringing to the table. I will also say that the reason why attributes matter, especially in uncertainty, is because what I've recognized is that these attributes sit at the very the bottom level, elemental level of our performance. So in other words, when the what hits the fan, a lot of our behaviors, our values, our personality, that a lot of that goes out the window, and we're acting at our very raw self. Okay. And I was always fascinated, Nick, with who we are at our most raw. I think I was given the gift when I went to Navy SEAL training of understanding that very viscerally, and then going to combat and really understanding that about myself and my teammates. And I felt like that was a superpower, because I knew that no matter what, no matter how bad things got or uncertain things got, I knew exactly what I could count on with myself and my teammates based on the attributes we all knew we could bring to the table. Even to this day, I joke, if I'm in an environment, say on an airplane or something, and something bad starts happening, I know there's a Navy SEAL also on that airplane. Even if I haven't met that person, I know exactly that I can count on that person for specific things, right? Because of just the way we train and the way we go through this selection
Sure.
process. So all this to say, the attributes allow us to understand each other in uncertainty, and that's the beauty. And if I know, and this is where they start, in fact, meshing together as teams, okay? Because not everybody obviously can have all of the attributes required for a situation. So we begin to mesh these attributes. If someone's high on something and the other person's low, well, I can lean on that person. Some attributes, both polarities matter, right? So patience is a great one. My wife and I, we've been married for 23 years. We have 2 teenage boys. We've lived through a war together, right? We consider ourselves a high-performing team. She is low on patience. She always has been, okay? I'm high on patience. That's worked beautifully for us in our 23-year marriage, because when patience is required, I step up. When impatience is required, she steps up. And her impatience has prevented me from sometimes taking too long or procrastinating or whatever. My patience has prevented her from sometimes running too quickly into a decision or moving too fast. So in these environments, we can start to lean on each other and work with these polarities. But ultimately, these attributes help us understand each other in uncertainty, challenge, or stress. Even though they show up in all behavior, really, we know each other at our most raw.
Great example. I was thinking about my wife, 16 years of marriage for me, and we were the opposite, but certainly like the patience and impatience thing I get, because a lot of people will see us from the outside and go, you're so different. And I would say, well, that's what makes us work. It's absolutely what makes us work. So I totally was on point with that. So just for those listening, for those interested in your book, there will be a link in the show notes. So the attributes, 25 hidden drivers of optimal performance. You can link straight through to that. And of course, to get that, we'll look out for Mastering Uncertainty as well. So it sounds like a fantastic book for HR professionals. So we'll try and include those links as best we can. I mentioned in my introduction that you've done some work with Simon Sinek as well. I want to bring this up to the fore, because at the start, I think when you were summing up what attributes are and how they differ, you talked about purpose. You talked about you need to have a reason to want to train an attribute in the first place, right? And we know that, certainly from my understanding of Simon's work, a lot of it is about finding your why, and he does a lot of linking that to high performance teams. So how does your work with Simon on high performing teams complement or differ from your SEAL experience?
Yeah, it differs just because the SEAL experience is so intense. It's a good way to put it, right? I mean, in the SEAL environment, your stakes are way higher in terms of how and why you need to perform the way you do. But that's probably the only place, because teaming, whether it's a SEAL team or a sports team or a business team or even a family team, teaming is the same no matter what. And so I think we found synergy, and we've been friends now for 10, 12 years. We found synergy very early on in the both the task and the ability to take some of these lessons and ideas from these very extreme, intense environments and bring them down into an arena where we could all humanize them and we could all kind of benefit from them. Because after all, Navy SEALs are human beings, right? We're just a bunch of guys who found ourselves in a specific niche inside of which we were able to excel, but we're humans. So his and my work on teaming is very complementary. In fact, we've done some courses together on teaming. Obviously, he's always been a soundboard and a mentor for all of my writing, and he and I talk, and he talks to me about his writing as well. But just specifically when we talk about the why, the purpose is kind of, okay, this is why we do it. But anybody who's familiar with the why understand that there's the why, the what, the how, and the what's, right? And what I feel the attributes do is they tell us how, right? The why is is our purpose. How is the attributes, because that's what we're bringing to the table. That's the type of engine. And just to give you a quick analogy, because I think I like it, and I think your audience will resonate. I always consider human beings as automobiles, okay? But we're all different types, just like the movie Cars, okay? Some of us are Jeeps, some of us are Ferraris, and some of us are SUVs, okay? But there's no judgment there, because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. But it behooves us to lift our hood and figure out what kind of engine we're running with, because some of the friction in our lives might be because we've been a Jeep that's been trying to run on a Ferrari track this whole time, or a Ferrari that's been trying to run on a Jeep track this whole time. The best thing is if we understand that, especially in our teaming, we now know who the Jeeps are, who the Ferraris are, and who the SUVs are, and who the pickup trucks are, because now we know, if this situation requires a pickup truck, that person's going to step forward. If this environment requires a Ferrari, that person's going to step forward. And we begin to create a synergistic environment and mode where we all just begin to work and lean and support, and this is how the highest performing teams move so rapidly, not only through all situations but even through stress, challenge, and uncertainty.
You that response has put a little question into my head, and I've got to try and phrase this in a way that hopefully it's easy to comprehend and follow me, right? Because I'm on a train of thought that's live and real. So you were talking then about how the humans are different with the idea of the different cars. You also talked earlier about how skills can be taught and measured easily, right? And we know that a lot of the work, particularly in the world of HR, people talk about the world of AI. Now, AI, people want to try and give everything out to AI to do it for us, and they can do a lot of skill-based activities really, really well, but in a homogenized manner. The idea of AI personality isn't formed enough yet. It's just task orientated. They don't need a why or a purpose beyond us telling it to do something, and it does it. But it can do those skills really, really well. But in using AI a lot, of course, we're taking potentially, and you may disagree, I don't know, but from my understanding of it, we're taking attributes out of the equation when we start to deploy AI to replace a human in that regard. So with that in context, of course, AI is also bringing a huge amount of uncertainty in the workplace, which you just talked about how you can master that. But in that context then, really important, I think, for the world of HR, which are quite fearful at the moment of how AI is going to change their jobs. Is it HR professionals going to be needed in the future, and these kind of things? Well, actually, AI can't take over the attribute part. So why is that so important then? Why is it so important that we absolutely leverage the power of AI, but we don't go full on in and just make it about skills? I'm just interested. We're talking about the difference in personalities, and it occurred to me that, well, AI won't have that in quite the same way.
Yeah, it's a great question, Nick, and we've thought about this, and we feel like this is actually such a great time for the attributes and this type of discussion, because AI is quite literally taking over and will continue to take over the skills-based work that humans are doing and will be doing. Okay, which makes it even more important that the humans running AI are centered on attributes, because the humans, we as humans who are running and managing AI, will need to be adaptable, resilient. It won't be a skills based thing anymore. It'll be, how do we in fact work with AI? And I think the balance comes with, yes, AI can do the skill, but humans will provide the attribute piece. And this is where I think AI and human beings can work in tandem, and will continue to work in tandem. Because you're right, AI just doesn't have that piece. Now, it might later on, and that's both interesting and terrifying to think about. But
Sure.
I think for the near term, we're dealing in an environment where we're going to see less and less need for skills based things, which means the human factor is going to be more and more based on attributes requirements. We're going to need human beings who come to the table with the ability to adapt, roll, innovate, create, task switch, whatever that is, whatever those attributes are, so that they may in fact better manage this ever evolving thing that is AI.
Yeah, I think it's a really clever and an intuitive response. And I agree, by the way. I think you mentioned attribute being tenacity, right? And a lot of the skill in AI at the moment, particularly in the language processing, is the way that we prompt. And we need to be tenacious in the way that we use AI, because AI will solve the problem in the way that we tell it to solve it. And that may not always be the way it needs to be solved. So, as you said, that persistence option, keep giving it the same prompt, is going to keep giving you the same response. You're going to need to show different attributes and patience and creativity and tenacity to get the response you want. So for me, I'm totally sold on that response, but I was intrigued to see where you were going with it, because it is indeed terrifying and exciting at the same time, for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier as well, I want to come back to this. The one thing, particularly in the world of HR, we're obsessed with data. We're obsessed with metrics we can give back that can influence organizational success, organizational performance, tracking everything from absence through to cost saving efficiencies and so on and so forth. How do we track attributes? How can HR leaders, if you want to start measuring this from an interview process, you want to understand that attributes and recognize they're super important in the workplace for delivering high performance, how do we track it?
Yeah, well, so the good news is right now we do have an assessment tool, right? We have an assessment tool that measures all 41 attributes, then that is available to anybody to use, and it will, as an individual, you take it and you figure out where you stack on all the attributes, and that starts to really inform you as the performance. That's one piece. The other piece is to first understand the attributes themselves, understand what they are, what they mean, because words matter, and it's really important to understand, okay, what is adaptability? What is the difference between, say, curiosity and open-mindedness? Because that's important, and that will show behavioral tendencies that are important and are effective. So understand the attributes themselves. and then begin to just start look at them and notice them. The cool thing about attributes is I call it the blessing and the curse of attributes, is that once you see them, you cannot unsee them. You will start seeing them everywhere. Once you start to learn and inculcate this language of performance, you will start to see attributes everywhere, just like we did in the SEAL teams. And so you will no longer look at someone who's underperforming and say, well, that's because that person couldn't type or can't do this. Or like, oh, wait a second, I'm actually seeing low adaptability, or I'm seeing low resilience, or I'm seeing low discernment, something like that. That's a real superpower. And so I think the way we begin to see this stuff is to just begin to inculcate ourselves with the knowledge, and then we will begin to see them everywhere, and just note those times of stress, challenge, and uncertainty, because that's when they show up the most visibly, right? Because that's when the real us is showing. It's like, oh, wait a second, personality is out the window, values are beliefs are out the window, all this stuff is out the window, and that's that raw person. And I'm seeing these things, and again, there's no judgment there. We have to. The other thing about these attributes is we really emphasize this is not about judging us. There's no you are not better than I am, and I'm not better than you are when it comes to attributes. Our attribute stack might be different, but all that tells us is that we have very different or different ways we can attack the problem or attack life, and that's powerful in both of our niches. So I think those are some ways, is to start learning them and start looking for them. Because again, it's once you see them, it's hard to unsee.
I'll tell you what, it's interesting, because while you were giving me that response, I don't know if my listeners have done the same. If you listen to this in audio, whether you're watching it on YouTube or wherever else you get your platform, your content from. For me, you created a visual of literally like the Matrix, walking around and seeing these bar charts of people at different levels, because you say, as you start identifying it, we know that the fast track to success in terms of change starts with awareness. And that's why there's so many coaches, why coaching is so valuable, because it raises awareness. When we're aware of someone's attributes, it allows us hopefully to grow our own attributes. I say that as an example. If I'm aware that someone is constantly doing something that within their attributes frustrates me, because I'm aware of it, it hopefully should improve my patience.
Oh, 100%. Because it totally improves and helps with empathy and it takes away judgment, because now we know, oh, wait a second, that person is a little bit lower on that. That's why they're experiencing life that way. And oh, by the way, they can do the same for us, which is very powerful. And this is a great
differentiator from the skills argument, because I can see your skill at shooting a rifle in that example. It doesn't improve my skill by seeing you necessarily. Okay, I can take some visual cues, but actually, in the way that you've just explained it, the more that we're aware of everyone else's attributes, the more we're going to enhance our own. I love that concept, and that was visually clear for me. A couple of questions just before we open the HR L&D Vault, Rich, if I may. I want to make sure I utilize all of your expertise as best I can for our listeners. And I'd be really interested to know about some of the common misconceptions about high-performing teams that you've encountered in your corporate training, because you've worked in real elite teams in really high stressful situations. And I wonder if there are any misconceptions that you've come across.
Yeah, two major ones. The first one is how we define high-performing teams, and the way we define high-performing teams. It's not just about a SEAL team or an athletic team. It's any group of two or more people working together towards a common goal. That, this is very important, not only perform when things are going great, but also when things are not going great. That is the big distinguishing factor between a regular team and a high-performing team, is the fact that they not only perform when things are going great, they also perform when things are not going great. But it also tells us that you can find high-performing teams everywhere. High-performing teams certainly can be in the military and business and athletics, but a great marriage is a high-performing team. A group of friends on a trip is a high-performing team. A group of people working on a project for their community can be a high-performing team. Okay, so that's the one distinguishing factor. And the other one is just the way we task organize. High-performing teams task organize in a very unique way. And it's not the pyramid. It's not the leader or the person in charge sits up at top and then word goes down, filters down. That's very bureaucratic. It's too slow. It's not the flat line. The flat line is this idea that no one outranks anybody, and it's all cool. It's all groovy. The problem with the flat line is you often don't know actually who's in charge. And on a flat line, things can happen on the right side that's not seen or heard by the left side, right? So information gets siloed in that model. And information in a high-performing team is never siloed. And it's actually not even the Robert Greenleaf servant leadership model, which is the upside-down pyramid. He flipped that pyramid upside down and said, hey, the leader is in service to their his or her people. And it's not that, because specifically in a high-performing team, burden is distributed. It's not all on one person. So the real way that the high-performing teams task organize is if people could just visualize a blob or an amoeba. And if you think about where that leader is in that amoeba, You could say, well, top, bottom, front, center, back, fronts, right? It's everywhere. In other words, the leader is wherever the leader needs to be in the moment. This is a concept we call dynamic subordination. Dynamic subordination implies that a high performing team understands that problems and challenges and issues can come from any angle at any moment. And when one does, the person who's closest to that problem and the most capable immediately steps up and takes lead, and everybody follows, right? And then the environment shifts and someone else steps up and takes lead. Okay. This is exactly how the highest performing teams operate, and many teams that are just high performing. I'll just give you a quick example in the civilian world of the commercial airliner. Okay, none of us will debate the fact that the captain is in charge of that aircraft. Okay, everybody's good with that. However, if the captain begins to taxi out to takeoff and gets a call from the maintenance person, and the maintenance person says, "Hey, I just found a problem with your aircraft. You need to turn around." No captain worth their wings is going to ignore that. They're immediately going to subordinate to the maintenance person, turn that aircraft around, and go back to the gate. Once they're back at the gate, they realize they have to deplane the aircraft. Captain doesn't step up and take charge of that either. Now the flight attendant steps up. Okay, so we are the highest performing teams, task organized and dynamically subordinate constantly, and that allows for us to step up and step back. And this is why understanding our attributes is so important, because if I know the attributes of my teammates, I know exactly when they're going to be leaning on me and where I'm going to need to lean on them. It makes that step up, step back process way faster. And that's how the highest performing teams operate.
Well, I mean, there's literally no way I can ask my last question after that kind of response. What a fantastic way of summarizing high performance leader. I think that's the best version, honestly, that I've ever heard in the way you've articulated it and made it a visual as well. So kudos to you for that. Instead of the question I was going to ask, let me ask you this, and before we jump into the vault, are there any questions I haven't asked you, which actually, you know what, Nick, for your audience, which are HR professionals, CPOs, senior people professionals across the globe, that maybe I haven't asked that you think would be useful for them to know before we close the show today?
Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, it's been great. I've loved every question. I would say the one thing I do want to remind HR professionals about attributes is that, and because HR professionals are oftentimes thought of hiring and firing. When we start looking at performance through the attributes lens, it offers us a valuable opportunity to see performance even inside of our organization and see opportunity for promotion from inside. So in other words, if we see someone who's the mailroom person, right, and they obviously their job doesn't require a bunch of attributes, that are needed for a CEO position, but we're seeing those attributes in that person, guess what we can do? We can earmark that person for potential promotion, right? So it allows us to earmark people inside of our organization for promotion. It allows us to not just look at people who are low performers and look at getting rid of them. It allows us to say, well, let me look at this performance and maybe ask ourselves, is the poor performance related to the fact that we have this person in a position that's not fully congruent with the attribute set they're bringing to the table? This happened to me even as a commanding officer. I had a supply person who was underperforming. When I looked at what was going on, I realized all I had to do is shift that person from their job to a job over here, and their performance skyrocketed. So it allows us to move internally the organization. And of course, it allows us to also hire directly for what we're looking for. The final piece, and I kind of joke around, all of this for me was created because I needed to learn how to fire people better. I needed to learn to explain why someone didn't make it through. So all of those first three are phenomenal. The last kind of great collateral message of this is that attributes allow us to fire better as well, because it allows us to give someone some real insight into why and how they may not be performing, and give them also insight onto other opportunities that they may go find that they would perform well in. And that's what allowed me to, if I had a guy who didn't make it through, I could have a conversation and say, hey, listen, you weren't showing the attributes we were looking for at this particular command, but all these other things, you could go over here, these 5 other places and just excel. And guess what? I'll write you a recommendation letter. I'll call the people and help you out. And so it allows even HR professionals to make allies out of those people who might in other ways be enemy. So I think it's just a really powerful, and that's why we're so juiced about it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's very, very clever. And actually it helps with retention. One of the biggest challenges HR professionals have right now is employee retention. There's a war for talent. It's a cliche. When you hear a cliche, you got to listen to it. It's out there. It's happening. Yeah. Because people need a career path, and people need to know that if they are in the wrong hole, what they want to have is be able to visualize a future and have the ability to be transparent and honest and upfront about, hey, I don't know if it's working for me, and vice versa from that HR professional to say it back. But hey, maybe you work better over here. I learned this in my own work. I had a group of tasks. My coach said to me, what task do you hate most? I went, these are really draining my energy. We did an energy audit. And he said, you know what? Put them up for sale if you like in your own business and just see who wants to do them. You'll be surprised. You hate them, but someone in your business will love those tasks.
Yes.
I couldn't believe it. I offered the things that I hated the most. And a couple of individuals went, I'll do that. I love doing that kind of work. And I was like, really? Like it was just win-win. And it turned out they were probably doing a lot of tasks they didn't like to do and we started task swapping, and it really does improve efficiency, and it improves more than just efficiency. It makes people feel valued and creates a vision and a career path and so on. But fantastic conversation. I'm going to open the HR L&D vault. 3 very short, sharp questions for you just to finish the show. First one is this. If you could give one piece of universal advice to HR professionals with all of your experience, Rich, what would it be?
It would be really dive into the human. With HR professionals, human resources starts with human for a reason, and oftentimes we let structure, bureaucracy, rules, regs, and things like that get into the way of looking at the human being. And we are all very unique, and we all have superpowers. And I think one of the gifts that HR professionals are given in terms of their role is they get to figure out what those superpowers are.
Fantastic. What's the most surprising lesson you've learned about human performance in your transition from military to corporate training?
I would say here's a funny one. It's the way that the civilian world looks at time. In other words, in the military, the way we looked at time there's 3 ways to look at time in the military. There was military time, there was civilian time, and there was Navy SEAL time. So military time is if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. Civilian time was anywhere between start time and 15 minutes, you're fine. Navy SEAL time was plus or minus 30 seconds. In other words, that's how we used to plan our missions and we tell our helicopters, hey, be there at 0131 plus or minus 30 seconds, because for us, being too early was just as bad as being too late. Right? So for me, I had to get very used to and learn that people don't think that way, and nor do they have to. So I've been that's where some of my empathy is dialed up. But that's time is one of the things I've learned.
I guess that must be one of the things you had to always unlearn when you adapt to the corporate world. When people were 10 minutes late, and you're like, that's 9.5 minutes later than they should be, right? The last question, in your opinion, what's the most undervalued attribute in today's corporate world? Undervalued attribute is empathy, and I think, and especially in the leadership realm. But I would say not even the corporate world. I would say even in just society, especially here in the States now. I would say the ability to try to feel what other people feel. And again, what people don't recognize or realize about empathy is empathy does not require agreement. Okay. You don't have to agree with someone to feel how they feel. And so empathy is something that I've deliberately tried to dial up my whole life, but certainly as I got out of the Navy, because again, too much empathy in the Navy SEAL world can be a detriment. But I think empathy is so important for people in the business world, for teaming, and especially for leadership. Fantastic. Listen, Rich Diviney, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Of course, for those that enjoyed Rich's words of wisdom all about attributes, you can check out his work at theattributes.com. There will be a link in the show notes. You can go directly to that website, click through to whatever platform you're listening to right now, check out that link, click through and find out. You can access the tools that Rich was talking about and a whole host of other resources as well. You can also connect with Rich on LinkedIn. I'll also put a link to Rich's book, which you should definitely access if anything we've discussed there has resonated. And I cannot believe it wouldn't have done, particularly if you work in HR. It's called The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. And look out for his next book, due to hit the stores soon, as Mastering Uncertainty. Absolutely ideal for HR professionals. That's something they deal with every single day. So Rich, huge thanks to you today for such an insightful conversation. I've loved it. I think we could have talked for another hour, but I'm conscious of your time, and I'm within that 30-second remit right now. So I'm going to wrap this up and say a huge thank you. Of course, if anyone needs help with any HR-related vacancies, get in touch with my team, jjrecruitment.com. But most importantly, Rich Diviney, thank you so much for your time today on the HR L&D podcast.
Thank you, Nick. Pleasure to be here.
This episode is sponsored by Deal. That's DEEL. Deal is your forever people platform built for global payroll and HR. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deal works for your team. Hire and onboard talent in over 150 countries in minutes and run payroll in over 100 countries in just a few clicks. And with Deal's suite of AI-powered learning and development tools, you can even customize career roadmaps, performance assessments, and more. So are you ready to transform your global payroll and HR processes? If you are, click the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deal today. That's DEEL.